What's up, friend? Hector here from StrongSec.com with this week's Technique of the Week. Today, I'm going to be breaking down 3 progressions that you need to know before you even think about doing the kettlebell jerk. And if you're currently doing the kettlebell jerk right now and you feel like things are just something's not right, something's missing, maybe you're not, breathing right, or just something doesn't feel right, I'm going to show you the exact progression that you need to take in order to perfect the jerk. And then in these 3 progressions, I'm going to be breaking down specific, like, little intricacies, little things that people just kind of overlook when it comes to making these progressions, and how you can avoid these same mistakes as well and take your jerk to the next level. So if you've been curious about the jerk, maybe you've been starting, like I said, and just it's not kind of working really well for you right now, you're definitely going to want to tune in for these 3 principles. So I'm going to jump over here back behind, and we're going to get into 3 specific progressions you need to be going through in order to improve your kettlebell jerk. Let's get started. All right, here we go. So we're going to be breaking down the 3 progressions that you need to go through before you ever attempt the kettlebell jerk, okay? And so in each progression, I'm going to cover some subtle details, some things that you need to be focusing on in each of those progressions, all right? So a while back, sometime mid-2019, we ran a beta test for our now launched course, Kettlebell Berserk, which is based off of the double kettlebell jerk. And we beta tested one of the plans that were in there, and a lot of the feedback that we got from the subscribers and our readers, because I was giving them some feedback and some like little tutorials here and there, and of course they would see my jerk technique, they realized that for a very long time that they were doing the jerk wrong the whole entire time. So that's something that I want to share with you today in 3 specific progressions, all right? So always want to consider that anytime we're going to do any kind of dynamic, any kind of ballistic or explosive movement, before we ever get there, we need to make sure that we can do it slow and controlled, and we can stabilize it in particular ranges of motion, all right? So if the double jerk, if you're rushing straight to the double jerk, because it is the sexiest of the kettlebell exercises, it's what I call the black belt of kettlebell lifts. It is kind of like the lift you're eventually trying to get to when it comes to like a lot of your overhead movements, okay? And so I'm not going to get into all the details. The benefits are endless when it comes to the double jerk, but a lot of the times we can start to peel back what's going wrong with the jerk as we make regressions back to the very beginning. So what would be the first stage of a jerk? And that's what we're going to be covering. So before I get into that, what would be let's take the kettlebell swing, right? Probably the most popular kettlebell exercise. It's the most fundamental, right? As far as the quick lifts in the kettlebell exercises. So if someone's swing is like just kind of not up to par, maybe their glutes aren't firing right, maybe the lat, something, just whatever's not going right in the swing, what's the first thing that we need to look at? We need to take a look at the deadlift, because if the deadlift is not on par, there's going to be leaks and holes in the swing. It could be abs not lighting up, it could be glutes, it could be a series of things. And so backing up, taking a look at the deadlift, if the deadlift, if we can't find anything in that deadlift, then we'll regress to the single leg deadlift, and we'll start just kind of picking it apart, all right? So the same thing goes for the jerk. And I recommend doing this with a single bell, not double bells. The reason for that is because with double bells, we can hide our asymmetries, we can hide like postural distortions, like changes in the body that are like compensations basically that are happening, and you don't catch that when you're loaded symmetrically on both sides, all right? So if we want to assess the jerk and make sure the jerk is crisp and where it needs to be, that way we reap all the benefits from the jerk, we need to take a look at the strict press. So the strict press is the first step towards getting to that jerk exercise, okay? Because it's the grind, it's the slow movement. So the strict press is the equivalent of like the deadlift for the swing. And the single bell strict press is the equivalent of the single leg deadlift. So we're starting to pick the body apart one side at a time. And that's where we're going to be starting with this first progression. So the first thing that you need to know is the strict press on both sides. And I recommend keeping your sets like 3 to 5 repetitions, just keeping it as a practice, okay? So here's a few things that we're looking for in the strict press. So once we clean the bell to the rack position, we're only loaded on one side. So consider your torso as like a cylinder, okay? Consider your torso and like your hips is a cylinder. We don't want this cylinder and then like, so we got the cylinder, right? And then our hips, our pelvis, this whole lumbo-pelvic hip region, our pelvis is like a big bowl, like a dish. And inside that dish, we have water. So one of the first things that we want to make sure that we have locked in place is we want to make sure that this cylinder is centered over the top of our hips and we're not anteriorly tilting, okay? So basically arching our back. So imagine my hips as this like bowl of water. If I'm tilting here, okay, if this is my first movement, like when I press, I'm spilling the water, okay? So Brett Jones, Chief of Education for Strong First, calls this you're spilling your hips, okay? So we don't want to spill our hips, and this applies across all exercises, whether it's kettlebell swing, deadlift, but especially like press and snatch. We don't want this change. So we want to make sure that our cylinder is centered over our hips, and that's where getting your glutes in tight, squeezing your legs, and making sure that all this is put together. The next thing that we're looking for in this strict press is we want this cylinder to stay intact. And so as we get into heavier weights, that's a whole entirely different subject, but there will be like some slight lean things kind of happening because your center of mass kind of starts to shift under the weight. We're not talking about that right now. You're gonna be using like a bell you can press easily 15 times, okay? Because we're working on this motor pattern, okay? So with a fairly light bell, so for me like 24 kilos is not a lot. This is something I can practice with pretty regularly. And so once I'm in this rack position, I don't want my torso, I don't want any of this to change. And this is a big thing that I see with people pressing kettlebells is they literally break this cylinder to press, especially when they get into pressing heavy bells. Now, like I said, the cylinder will change a little bit, but it should not break. You should not have this downward motion. And so once we clean the bell into the rack position, once we get into the rack position here, we don't want this, we don't want any of this cylinder to change. So here's an example. You see that shoulder dip? I see that a lot when I see people press. Boom. They have this shoulder dip and we're losing this cylinder, okay? So we want to stay braced here as we inhale, cylinders over our pelvis, cylinder stays intact, press. Now, as the bell gets heavier and you're getting kind of near that max effort, there'll be like a slight shift and there'll be a slight lean because your body's actually, the center of your mass is trying to get closer to the bell as you're pressing. But there's not this, it doesn't continue to increase, etc. So that's a couple of the key things that we're looking for in the strict press. So we're looking for stable hips, okay? Pull the kneecaps up, pelvis is tucked under, okay? Neutral, cylinder over the pelvis. We're not spilling. We're also not breaking the cylinder from left to right, okay? So that's the first thing that we need to get down when it comes to making that first progression to the jerk, and with the single bell, because then eventually you can go to doubles, but double bells, this shift doesn't really show up. You'll see that anterior shift, but you won't see a lot of this side to side shift, okay? So that's why it's good to do this with single bell. So from there, the next progression is once you get that down and you can really own that press for multiple sets of 5 upwards to 8 repetitions, multiple sets. If you can knock out, let's just say 30 presses or more in a session with a 24 kilo bell, you're ready for the next progression in that continuum. So it's what's called a pressing continuum. So you got the strict press. The next exercise would be the push press, okay? So the push press, a lot of these principles are gonna start to spill over. So the same thing in the push press, once you have the bell in the rack position, you don't want any of this spillage. You don't want the cylinder breaking side to side, okay? So once you get the bell into the rack position, we want to keep both of our feet planted on the ground. So whenever we have, so the push press is going to be, there's going to be like it's like a quarter of a squat. So it's a slight dip, okay? So it's a slight dip, okay? Quarter of a squat, driving through the hips, and then once the bell gets about eye level or so, you're pressing out the rest of the way. So a couple of things that we're looking for here is we want our feet to stay planted on the ground. And as I do that first dip, I don't want my knees to move forward, okay? I want to go straight down, like I'm going to do like a front squat, basically. So I'm going straight down, quarter squat, and then drive through the hips. Imagine like you're doing a kettlebell swing. That's the hip action, okay? Hips, boom, and then you're going to go through your press, the press at the top, okay? So one thing we want to be conscious of, like I said, we don't want our knees to dip forward because that may encourage the heels to come up on that initial dip. It's best that you keep your heels down through the whole push press, but it's okay if your heels come up a little bit on the drive because it's an explosive movement, and once we get into the jerk is a triple extension exercise. So we don't want the heels to come up here, okay? You see how my knees shifted forward? Now my heels are coming up, all right? So it's a dip straight down, feet stay planted, my weight is over the center of my foot, okay? And then from here, as soon as I drive, it's okay if my heels come up a little bit and then come back down. Like, it's okay, but it's best if you can keep them down, but not like the end of the world if your heels come up. So we're looking to maintain that cylinder. We're looking to not spill the hips, and we're looking to keep our feet flat on the ground, okay? And then we want that quarter squat, okay? Straight down and not knees going forward, because then that's going to encourage the heels to come up off the ground, all right? And then from there, the finish is standing up, driving through your hips, and then finishing the press from there. So I'll show you an example. I've got a couple of push presses for you. Actually, I'll kind of be in this kind of 45-degree angle here. Okay, so I clean it up. Okay, from here, quarter squat, and I inhale as I dip down. Okay, notice that I keep my cylinder over my hips. I'm not spilling. I'm not spilling my hips. I'm staying centered over the top, okay? Then I'm gonna catch the bell. I'm gonna bring it down about eye level. And then once I get to eye level, I catch it with my legs. I dip and catch it. And then I stand back up, maintain the cylinder. I'm not slouching. So you'll see a lot of like the slouching and more of like the kettlebell sport style of lifting. That's a whole entirely different method of training. So, which I'm not going to get into, but essentially it's more about efficiency. So they're trying to conserve their energy. Here we're looking for all out max power, which means we're going to be using a ton of energy. Okay, so we're not trying to do maximum reps in a certain amount of time. Two completely different methods of training, all right? So push press, once you clean the bell, okay, cylinder over the pelvis, kneecaps pulled up, hips in tight, okay? Inhale, little puff through the nose, okay? Quarter squat, I stay over my center of mass. My weight is over the center of my foot, driving overhead. And then inhale, catch it here, using your abs to brace the catch, all right? So that's the next progression. So we need to, just like we did the strict press, we need to own that push press for multiple sets of 5 to 8 repetitions or so. Again, you should be able to knock out 30 or more total reps in a session with the push press before you even consider going to the double jerk, okay? Or the single kettlebell jerk, okay? Just the jerk in general. And I recommend running all this with a single bell first, own this with a single bell, making sure that we can maintain posture. Because if you can maintain the posture, then you're gonna be ready and there's not gonna be any compensations that you won't catch once you get to double bells, okay? Because eventually you wanna get to double bells because that's where you're gonna be hyper efficient. You're gonna get faster results because you're lifting twice the load, which means you're doing more work. The more work you do, the more energy you're gonna burn, you know, potential fat loss there, and obviously the more volume that you do, the more overload you put on the system, you have potential for muscle building as well, okay? But eventually we gotta get this down with a single bell. So now the next progression, once we got that down, we're lined up pretty well to knock out the double jerk. Everything applies here. The only thing that really changes is from the push press, you're now actually dropping underneath the weight with the jerk. Okay, so you're not just driving straight through to the lockout. You're now driving up, going into triple extension. Okay, like you're doing a jump shot. You're going into triple extension. Once the bell gets to eye level, you're dropping down back into that quarter squat and you're catching the bell weight centered over the center of your foot. Okay, so I'll knock out a few jerks so you can see what those look like. And then we'll recap this whole thing, all right? So I'm gonna do the 45-degree angle here. So everything applies. Cylinder over the hips, no spilling of the hips, no breaking of the cylinder from side to side, okay? Do one more. That's the jerk, okay? So you noticed it pretty much looked just like the push press. The only difference here is I was dropping underneath the weight, okay? So that's the natural progression, what we call the press continuum. Strict press. Eventually, once you get really good at the strict press, you set a good foundation there, you're ready for the more dynamic exercise. So the push press is kind of like a hybrid of the two. It's half ballistic, half grind. So the ballistic part is this dip, drive, that's the ballistic. And then once you get the bell here, it kind of stalls out and then you got to press all the way through. So it's a hybrid. Then you get to the jerk, and that is a full-on ballistic explosive movement, okay? So we need to make sure that we can stabilize as we're pressing, because if we can't stabilize in just a pure grind, trying to stabilize ballistically is gonna be a lot harder, right? It's kind of like being able to walk and then eventually jog and then eventually run and then eventually sprint. Sprinting is that greatest, the biggest expression of that running pattern, right? So learning how to walk is kind of like the deadlift, and going for a run is kind of like the push press, and then the sprint, the explosive movement that uses the most energy, that is the equivalent of like the jerk, okay? But you're never just gonna get out on the track. If you haven't ran since like childhood, you're never gonna get on the track and just take off sprinting, right? I mean, you can, but life's gonna suck for you for a while, and who knows what orthopedic injuries you can sustain along that road, just kind of going right into that. So, something I wanted to address when it came to the jerk is work on these progressions before you get to the jerk, okay? So if you're currently doing the jerk and you feel like, man, the jerk's just kind of wonky, it's just kind of, something's missing, back up a few steps. What does the push press look like? If the push press, like, man, I don't know, I'm still not feeling stable, I'm still not getting, like something is happening between my knees and my pecs, this whole lumbo-pelvic hip region, something's not firing here. Maybe you're not getting synced in here. Back it up to the strict press, okay? You'll start to, as you peel those layers back, you'll start to find the holes, and then from there you can plug those holes with whatever technical corrections, whether it's breathing, whether it's, you know, bracing and creating some tension there. So once you find those holes, you can plug them own that strict press, then work your way to the push press, and then work your way back to the jerk. And then you'll be amazed at how much more crisp the jerks are. So once you kind of make it through that progression, I recommend you do it also, don't do it long cycle. So not right off the bat. Long cycle is clean, put, jerk, clean, so cleaning in between. So I don't recommend doing long cycle for any of the progressions just yet. So not clean and press, not clean and push press, not clean and jerk, not just yet, especially if you're just getting into this. Clean the bell up and just work on multiple strict presses. Clean the bell up, just working on multiple push presses, so no clean in between. Because that clean's a dynamic, explosive exercise. And if you're gonna be knocking out multiple reps like that over and over and over, we need to make sure that we can stabilize through the hips and through this whole torso region, right? So just one clean to the rack is okay. And you may even want to cheat clean it. Maybe you're not ready at all for any dynamic exercise. And maybe you need to set up with your bell 2-hand, and maybe you need to cheat clean it with both hands, do your presses, push presses or jerks, okay? So go through that, work through those progressions, and I'd love to hear your feedback on this. Drop a comment below, let me know what you think about this progression, if this helps. If you're enjoying the videos, be sure to subscribe to the channel. I've got other videos that'll pop up here. And also let me know if there's any other kettlebell movements, or not even just kettlebell movements, but just movements in general. If you're having a hard time with certain areas of your strength training or anything like that, I'd love to help you out. Just drop a comment and maybe I can make a video of that as well. So that's all I got for this week. Hector with StrongAsHeck.com with this week's Technique of the Week.